Hi, thank you guys for checking out part 2 of our inmate manipulation course, situational awareness and insight. Guys, no matter what videos we go through, this has got to be in the back of your mind through each video. This is how important these terms are, situational awareness and insight. If you go back to my story in the last video where I needed help, I called for the sergeant, he went in and he yelled at me, and the next day when I had that unit, the inmates knew I was vulnerable and they were quick to pounce. It was the inmates that had situational awareness, but it was me that had the insight. And thank God, when I felt the need to do something that was in conflict, I looked at myself and then I looked at the situation I was in. I said, hey, something doesn't feel right here. And eventually I did what I could to ease that conflict, push those inmates away. The funny thing is, when you have a supervisor that has a lot of years experience and he's coming in and he's embarrassing me and he's just yelling without having any control of who he is or what he's doing, where's his situational awareness? Was he aware of what he was doing to me at that time? Was he aware of the situation that he was putting me in? Was he aware how when he yelled at me in that unit, he made a really good opportunity for the inmates to pounce on me? And also, where was his insight? Probably still in his car. Came into the unit yelling at me, aggravated, should have checked himself. He had no idea what he was doing. And unfortunately, when he has no idea of what he was doing, he had no idea of the situation that he was creating. So again, guys, in the backdrop, situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. Pay attention to the situations that you're in and listen to your gut about how they're taking in that situation. Have that insight. Now, guys, we mentioned this briefly yesterday, and I just want to go over it a little bit more, kind of explain it a little bit more in detail. One thing is going to be divide and conquer. We talked about that briefly because remember, guys, when the supervisor had yelled at me and the inmates started to play me out, they were trying to build animosity between me and my peers. So there was an effort to take me away from my peers and make them my resource. And that's part of that divide and conquer. But there's another thing that's part of that as well, and I call it isolation. And this is just a one-way isolation. What I mean by that, guys, is that they're isolating me from my peers. So again, I want to explore that first story again because that's what matters. This is where you see someone being motivated to do something that was never their intent. Okay, so when you look at the divide and conquer method, you have these inmates that knew that I was embarrassed. They knew that I was vulnerable. They knew it. They saw it the day before. They saw how I had left that unit. So they thought in their mind, hey, when this guy comes back in, we have the ability now to lift him up. We have the ability now to comfort him. And he's going to be receptive of that. Remember, guys, at the beginning of the story, when the inmate asked me for help, I was good. My peers were good. I had no issues. That was an easy no for me. Don't need your help. I got this. Got it. And I'm sure there'll be talk at that moment where the inmate's like, well, this guy's by the book, is going to be a little bit harder to turn. But then all of a sudden that situation comes in, and that person at the beginning of the shift is no longer that same person at the end. So now when the inmates start to pounce, their thing is this: how do we isolate this employee from his peer staff? Because now, guys, I need my peers. I need my support staff. They're the ones that are going to protect me. They're the ones that are going to save my life. But just in a brief moment, when that person yelled at me, when that supervisor came in and yelled at me, that was a major divide. Now the thing is here was they were going to take that divide and they were going to go ahead and do what? They were going to go ahead and build animosity between me and that supervisor and eventually use that as a way for me to build animosity between me and the rest of staff. Now think about that, guys. I'm slowly being moved away from the group that I need to be in. So just to kind of draw a picture for you. because I think this will explain it better. If we have two groups, and let's just say this is custody staff, and let's just say this is the inmates, right? The next day, when the inmates are coming in after I've been yelled at, I'm in the middle. I'm here. They've pulled me out. So thank God I had enough insight to reinforce my connection to come back here. Thank God that inmate had said, hey, that's how all custody is like, because that's where the inmate messed up, because that wasn't my experience. But the thing is if I would have fell into that trap, if I would have started continuing to believe that, yes, custody's bad too because they're no different than that supervisor, because that's what the inmates were doing. They were building that connection between that supervisor that I despised and hoping I would carry that same feeling over to the rest of my peers. What that would have done now was that would have pushed me closer and closer to that group, which would ultimately made me lose my connection to this group. And they will embrace me. And they're doing that because they built animosity here between me and them, which only strengthens this potential connection. But again, I'm in the middle. Now here's a couple of things, guys, when you're in the middle. And by the way, I'm new. So for me, every day I could be going through ambiguous situations that I don't know how to handle. And now that I'm in the middle, which way do I want to go? Technically, I want to go this way. I never want to go that way. But when I'm in the middle and they're pulling me in, and what they're doing is they're isolating me from my support staff, and I start despising them, I don't even start to look that way. What I do now is I start looking this way. And what happens here is they become my resource. It's a group dynamic. They become the one that I embrace. That means that any time, guys, that I'm caught in an ambiguous situation, I'm going to be going this way. Because I can't go here. But guys, that's how they're controlling me. But don't forget that they're also controlling that perspective of how custody sees me. What they're going to start doing is, when other custody members come into the unit, they may get a little closer to me. Or who knows, they could be working some angle out with the other custody people saying, hey, yo, Ganji does not like you guys. And they could be playing even a further divide. So now, not only am I avoiding custody, but custody's not making any attempt to find me. That just moves me further and further here. You know, it's a very, very dangerous game. But at the end of the day, you have to be aware of which direction you're being pulled and where you're going to go for your resources. Day one for me was pushing that inmate aside. But after I went through that situation, there could have been a potential where I could have went from the middle all the way to the inmate side. All because of that one moment of vulnerability, that building of animosity, and the perception of how I'm close to those inmates, how custody sees me. And then again, maybe a few inmates reinforcing that by talking to the other custody, my peers, and maybe just building some animosity as well. So they're just isolating me and isolating me. And in the end, here's this big circle. These are all the inmates right here. And here I am. Done. I am done. There's another thing too, guys, we may not know. Now mind you, this isolation, this divide and conquer happened for two reasons. Because the sergeant set up a situation for it to happen, and the inmates took advantage of that opportunity. Correct? But there's another way it could happen as well. Sometimes we have employees that are disgruntled. They're negative. And a lot of us don't want to be around those employees. So what happens here is the inmates are watching and they see that we don't interact with this employee. And what happens is this employee is isolating themselves. So we have to do the opposite. When you have that negative employee, when you have that disgruntled employee, we have to find ways to embrace them. Because if we don't, that negative employee is all alone, surrounded by a lot of inmates who are hungry. They need to see that connection. You got to realize something. One of the tests that inmates do is to see how connected people are. Sometimes you'll have an inmate that will come up to you, hey, can I tell you something in confidence? And then when you listen, they go to see where you go with that. Are you going to tell your peers? Are you going to tell your supervisor? Or when you come in the next day, nothing happened? It's all a test. When you have that isolated employee, even if they're tough to be around, it's good for the inmates to see that other staff is interacting with them. Let them see that connection. And if anything, double up on that need to connect with them. And explain to that person, hey, listen, what you're doing, you're putting yourself out on a ship. We need to be able to connect. Sometimes that happens between departments. I mean, there's a lot of places where civilian and custody don't get along. And now what we have here is just two departments that just have this animosity for whatever reason. Most likely it's a personality conflict that now been generalized to the whole department. So now you have just this divide, and inmates see that. They can play both sides. They can easily play both sides. That's why it's very important that we reinforce our connection. Let the inmates see that civilians and custody or sworn staff and non-sworn staff are working together as one to complete the mission. Let them see those interactions. Let them know that at no time ever is one of our employees left alone. Ever. The reason why we had to explore that divide and conquer, guys, is because it happens all the time. It happens all the time. In order for manipulation to work, there has to be an attempt from an inmate to isolate you from your peers. They have to be that level of resource. No different than a cult, guys. Cults, what they do is they bring people in and they cut them off from all outside influence. Same thing here. When you're trapped in that circle and the game is going on, inmates are going to do whatever they can to keep people out of your circle that can have a negative influence against what they're trying to do. It is a serious game. And once it happens, guys, and once you're in that circle, you're in. You're in. So again, what helped me was I recognized it when I was kind of in the middle. And then when the inmate tried to generalize the animosity towards everyone, I was able to pull myself back to where I needed to be. I was able to go from the middle back to where I needed to be. And that took two things. It's what I said right at the beginning. Insight and situational awareness. And remember I said something about the process being subtle and slow moving? When that was happening, it was my insight that identified the process. It was my situational awareness that identified the process. And for that sergeant that yelled at me, no situational awareness, no insight, he left me vulnerable to the process. It's crazy. It really is. Guys, this is the end of video number 2. Remember, this video is meant to be the backbone of the dialogue that we're going to go through. So we talked about the process. We also talked about insight and situational awareness. In the next video, we're going to talk about how we justify our directives to the inmate population. What justifications are weak and what justifications are strong. All right, guys, I'll see you in video 3.